What happens when one of comedy's most unpredictable voices sits across from late-night television's golden boy and the gloves come off? Tonight, we witness something that nobody saw coming. A moment that had the entire studio holding their breath and viewers at home scrambling for their phones to record what was unfolding live on television. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story is about to take you on a ride that nobody could have predicted. The Tonight Show stage was set like any other evening, but from the moment Katt Williams walked out, something felt different. The comedian's energy was electric, almost volatile, as he settled into the guest chair. Jimmy Fallon, ever the professional host, flashed his trademark smile and dove into what should have been routine banter. "So, Katt, you've been doing comedy for decades now, and you've always been known for speaking your mind," Jimmy began, his voice carrying that familiar, enthusiastic tone. "What keeps you motivated to keep pushing boundaries in your comedy?" Katt leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Jimmy's face. "You know what, Jimmy? That's an interesting question coming from someone who's made a career out of playing it safe. You want to know what motivates me? Truth. Raw, unfiltered truth. Something this industry has been running from for years." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure if this was part of the planned segment or if they were witnessing something more spontaneous. Jimmy's smile wavered for just a moment before he recovered, trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "Well, truth is important, absolutely," Jimmy replied, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "But comedy is also about bringing people together, making them laugh, finding that common ground where everyone can just enjoy themselves." Katt's laugh was sharp, cutting through the studio air like a blade. "Common ground. Jimmy, let me ask you something. When was the last time you told a joke that actually mattered? When was the last time you said something that might cost you a sponsor or make some executive uncomfortable?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jimmy shifted in his seat, his smile becoming more forced. "I think all comedy matters, Katt. Whether it's making someone forget their troubles for a few minutes, or just bringing a little joy into their day." "Joy," Katt repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. "That's beautiful, Jimmy. Really touching. But let me tell you something about joy. Real joy comes from truth. From saying the things that need to be said, even when they make people squirm, even when they make network executives reach for their phones." The camera caught Jimmy's producer off to the side, speaking urgently into his headset. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable, with audience members exchanging glances and whispering among themselves. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but there was strain in his voice now. "Well, you're certainly not holding back tonight, are you? I guess that's what makes you Katt Williams." "No, Jimmy," Katt said, leaning forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a more intense tone. "What makes me Katt Williams is that I'm not afraid to call out the game when I see it being played. And brother, I've been watching you play this game for years." The studio audience fell silent. This wasn't the usual lighthearted banter they were accustomed to on The Tonight Show. Jimmy's face flushed slightly as he realized this interview was spiraling into uncharted territory. "I'm not sure I follow you," Jimmy said, though his nervous laughter suggested he understood exactly what Katt was implying. Katt smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "Oh, you follow me just fine. You've been following the same script for years. The same safe jokes, the same harmless bits, the same corporate-approved comedy that doesn't challenge anyone or anything. When did you stop being a comedian and become a content creator?" The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His hands fidgeted with his note cards as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I think there's room for all kinds of comedy, Katt. Not every joke has to be a political statement or social commentary." "Political statement," Katt's voice rose slightly. "I'm not talking about politics, Jimmy. I'm talking about authenticity. I'm talking about having the courage to be real with people instead of feeding them the same sanitized, focus group-tested material night after night." Jimmy's smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a look of growing frustration. "Look, Katt, I respect what you do. I really do. But not everyone needs to be controversial to be funny. Some of us believe in bringing people together instead of dividing them." "Dividing them?" Katt stood up slightly in his chair, his energy intensifying. "Jimmy, the only thing I divide is truth from fiction. The only thing I separate is real from fake. And if that makes people uncomfortable, then maybe they need to be uncomfortable." The studio was dead quiet now, the usual laughter and applause replaced by an almost suffocating tension. Jimmy looked toward his producer, clearly seeking some kind of guidance on how to handle what was becoming an increasingly volatile situation. I think we might be getting a little heated here, Jimmy said, attempting to inject some levity back into the moment. Maybe we should talk about your upcoming tour dates or something lighter. Katt's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like disappointment. There it is right there. The moment when it gets real, you want to change the subject. You want to talk about tour dates and plug my shows because that's safe. That's the formula. Keep it light. Keep it moving. Don't let anything get too real or too honest. That's not what I'm doing, Jimmy protested. But his voice lacked conviction. That's exactly what you're doing, Katt shot back. And you know what the tragedy is? You used to be funny. Before all this. Before the network and the corporate sponsors and the need to be everyone's friend. You actually had something to say. Now you're just a professional smile with a desk. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Jimmy's face darkened considerably as he processed the full impact of Katt's words. For the first time in years of hosting The Tonight Show, Jimmy Fallon's composure was cracking. The color had drained from his face, then returned as a deep flush of anger and embarrassment. The studio audience could sense the shift, the way the atmosphere had gone from uncomfortable to genuinely electric with tension. You know what, Katt? Jimmy said, his voice carrying a sharp edge that viewers had never heard before. That's really unfair. I work incredibly hard to bring quality entertainment to millions of people every single night. Just because I choose not to be confrontational doesn't mean I'm fake. Katt laughed, but it wasn't his usual comedic laugh. This was something darker, more cutting. Quality entertainment. Jimmy, you do the same 5 bits over and over again. You play games with celebrities. You read mean tweets. You do impressions that sound like a drunk person doing karaoke. When did entertainment become so damn lazy? Those bits are popular, Jimmy fired back, his professional mask slipping further. People enjoy them. Not everything has to be some deep philosophical statement about society. Popular? Katt repeated, shaking his head slowly. You know what else is popular? Fast food. Reality television. Social media drama. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it has any nutritional value. Your show is the comedy equivalent of empty calories. Jimmy's hands clenched into fists on his desk. That's enough. I've been nothing but respectful to you since you walked out here, and you've done nothing but attack everything I've built. Respectful? Katt's voice rose with genuine disbelief. Jimmy, you've been condescending since the moment I sat down. You ask me about pushing boundaries like it's some cute little quirk. Like I'm a dancing monkey here to entertain your audience with my edginess. You don't respect what I do. You tolerate it. The audience was completely silent now. Some people looking genuinely uncomfortable, others leaning forward with fascination. This was unlike anything that had ever happened on late-night television. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, something he rarely did during interviews. You want to know the truth, Katt? The truth is that comedy doesn't always have to be angry. It doesn't always have to be about tearing people down or making everyone miserable with how terrible everything is. Making people miserable. Katt stood up as well. The two comedians now facing each other across the desk like opponents. Jimmy, I'm trying to wake people up. I'm trying to shake them out of the coma that your type of entertainment puts them in. You give people just enough laughs to keep them docile. Just enough distraction to keep them from asking real questions. That's ridiculous, Jimmy shot back. I'm not some corporate puppet, Katt. I make my own creative decisions. Katt's smile was predatory now. Do you really? Tell me something, Jimmy. When was the last time you told a joke about your network? When was the last time you criticized a sponsor? When was the last time you said something that NBC executives didn't pre-approve? Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like he was searching for words that wouldn't come. The question had hit something deep and uncomfortable. That's different, Jimmy finally managed. That's just being professional. Professional? Katt said, savoring the word. There's that word again. You know what professional used to mean in comedy? It meant being good at your job. Now it means being quiet, being safe, being grateful for whatever scraps they throw you. I'm not grateful for scraps. Jimmy's voice was getting louder now. I've earned everything I have. I've worked for years to get where I am. Worked. Katt's laugh was bitter. Jimmy, you've been auditioning for years. Every night, every show, every interview. You're still trying to prove you deserve to be here. You're still performing for approval from people who will replace you the moment your ratings drop. Jimmy's face was red now, his usual composure completely abandoned. At least I don't spend my time tearing down other comedians. At least I don't go on talk shows just to attack my colleagues. Colleagues? Katt's eyes widened with mock surprise. Is that what we are, Jimmy? Because I thought colleagues supported each other. I thought colleagues pushed each other to be better. Instead, you surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear. That's not true, Jimmy protested. But his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Katt pressed. When was the last time someone on your staff disagreed with you? When was the last time someone told you that a bit wasn't funny or that you were playing it too safe? You've created an echo chamber where everyone's job depends on making you feel good about yourself. Jimmy looked toward his producer again, clearly hoping for some kind of intervention. But the man seemed frozen, unsure how to handle what was unfolding. You want to know what's really tragic? Katt continued, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. I remember watching you when you first started. You had fire then. You had something to say. You took risks. Now look at you, playing it safe behind that desk, afraid to say anything that might upset your corporate masters. I'm not afraid, Jimmy said. But even he didn't sound convinced. Then prove it, Katt challenged, leaning forward across the desk. Right now, on your own show, in front of your own audience. Say something real. Say something that matters. Stop hiding behind your games and your safe jokes, and show people the comedian you used to be. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Jimmy stared at Katt, his mouth working silently as he processed what was being asked of him. The audience held its collective breath, sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would define both men's careers. I don't have to prove anything to you, Jimmy finally said, his voice quiet but intense. Katt smiled sadly, as if he had expected that exact response. No, Jimmy, you don't. But maybe you should prove something to yourself. Maybe you should remember what it felt like to be a comedian instead of a content producer. The studio lights seemed brighter somehow, more harsh, illuminating every line of tension on both men's faces as they stared at each other across a divide that seemed to represent everything wrong with modern entertainment. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Jimmy's chest was rising and falling with barely controlled emotion while Katt stood motionless, his eyes never leaving Jimmy's face. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras and the distant sound of traffic outside. Then something shifted in Jimmy's expression. The corporate smile, the polished professionalism, the carefully maintained image. All of it cracked like ice under pressure. When he spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. You think you know me, Jimmy said, his words cutting through the silence. You think you have me all figured out? Sitting there judging everything I've built? You want real, Katt? You want honest? Fine, let me tell you something real. Katt raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the sudden change in Jimmy's demeanor. I'm listening. Jimmy walked around from behind his desk, closing the distance between them until they were face to face. You talk about authenticity like you're the only one who has it, like you're the only comedian who's ever struggled or had to make compromises. But here's what's real, Katt. I've been performing since I was a teenager, grinding in clubs where nobody knew my name, eating ramen noodles for months just to afford gas to get to the next gig. That's the same story every comedian has, Katt interjected. But Jimmy raised his hand to cut him off. No, let me finish. You want to talk about selling out? About corporate masters? I'll tell you what selling out really looks like. It looks like watching better comedians than me give up because they couldn't figure out how to play the game. It looks like seeing brilliant, authentic voices disappear because they were too real for television, too honest for the masses. Jimmy's voice was getting stronger, more passionate. The audience could sense something fundamental was shifting. You think I don't know I'm playing a character up here? Jimmy continued. You think I don't know that this version of me is sanitized and corporate approved? Of course I know that. But you know what else I know? This show employs over 200 people. Writers, producers, camera operators, security guards, janitors. All of them have families. All of them have bills to pay. Katt's expression was changing, the predatory smile fading as he realized Jimmy wasn't backing down anymore. So yeah, maybe I'm not as edgy as you, Jimmy pressed on. Maybe I don't push boundaries the way you do. But while you're up there on your pedestal talking about artistic integrity, I'm making sure that 200 families have steady paychecks. While you're criticizing my safe jokes, I'm creating opportunities for young comedians who might not get a chance anywhere else. That's noble, Katt said. But there was less venom in his voice now. But what about your own integrity as an artist? Jimmy laughed. But it wasn't the polished laugh his audience was used to. This was something rougher, more human. My integrity. Let me tell you about integrity, Katt. Integrity is showing up every single night, even when you don't feel like it. Integrity is finding ways to make people laugh without tearing them down. Integrity is building something that lasts instead of just burning everything to the ground. The studio was electric now. This wasn't the Jimmy Fallon anyone had ever seen before. The mask was completely off, revealing something raw and powerful underneath. You want to know why I don't attack my network or my sponsors? Jimmy continued. It's not because I'm afraid. It's because I'm smart enough to know that if I destroy this platform, I can't help anyone. If I burn all my bridges, I can't lift up other comedians. If I lose this job, all those families I mentioned lose their security. Katt was silent now, his earlier aggression replaced by something that looked almost like respect. But here's the thing that really gets me, Jimmy said, his voice dropping to a more personal level. You come on my show in front of my audience, people who trust me to give them something good at the end of a hard day. And you want to tear all that down. For what? To prove a point. To show everyone how authentic you are compared to me. I was trying to wake people up, Katt said. But his voice had lost much of its earlier fire. Wake them up to what? Jimmy shot back. To how miserable everything is. To how fake and corporate and soulless entertainment has become. You think people don't already know that? You think they tune into my show because they're too stupid to see through it. Jimmy moved even closer, his voice intensifying. They watch because they want a break from all the anger and cynicism. They watch because they want to laugh without having to think about how terrible everything is. They watch because sometimes, just sometimes, they want to believe that joy doesn't have to come with a lecture about societal decay. The audience was completely captivated. Some people were nodding along with Jimmy's words, while others looked conflicted, as if they were seeing both sides of an argument they'd never considered before. You think authenticity means being angry all the time? Jimmy continued. You think being real means pointing out every flaw, every compromise, every imperfection? But you know what? Sometimes being real means choosing kindness over cleverness. Sometimes authenticity means admitting that not every moment has to be a teachable moment. Katt stood in silence, processing Jimmy's words. The dynamic between them had completely shifted. Where before Katt had been the aggressor and Jimmy the defensive target, now Jimmy was pressing his advantage while Katt seemed to be genuinely considering what he was hearing. I'm not saying you're wrong about everything, Jimmy said, his tone softening slightly. The industry does have problems. There is too much corporate influence, too much playing it safe. But the solution isn't to burn it all down and make everyone as angry as you are. The solution is to find ways to do better while still creating something people actually want to watch. So, what are you saying? Katt asked quietly. Jimmy looked directly into his eyes. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, there's more than one way to be an authentic comedian. Maybe authenticity doesn't always have to come with a side of rage. Maybe sometimes the most honest thing you can do is give people a reason to smile instead of another reason to be angry at the world. The confrontation had reached a turning point, but neither man was backing down. The tension in the studio was different now, less volatile, but somehow more intense, as if everyone present understood they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The studio held its breath as Katt Williams stood motionless, his usual rapid-fire energy replaced by an almost contemplative stillness. For the first time since the interview began, he seemed to be genuinely considering someone else's perspective instead of simply waiting for his turn to attack. You know what, Jimmy? Katt said finally, his voice notably quieter than before. I came here tonight thinking I knew exactly who you were. I thought I had you pegged as just another corporate comedian who sold his soul for a network paycheck. Jimmy remained standing, his posture still defensive, but his expression showing genuine curiosity about where this was heading. But listening to you just now, Katt continued, hearing you talk about those 200 families, about creating opportunities for other comedians, that's not something a soulless corporate puppet would say. That's something a man with real convictions would say. The audience was leaning forward now, sensing that the confrontation was evolving into something deeper and more complex than anyone had anticipated. However, Katt added, and Jimmy tensed again, I still think you're wrong about one fundamental thing. You said people watch your show because they want a break from anger and cynicism. But what if they're watching because they've been conditioned to accept mediocrity? What if they've been trained to be satisfied with empty calories instead of demanding something that actually nourishes them? Jimmy shook his head firmly. That's exactly the kind of elitist thinking that drives me crazy, Katt. You're basically saying that millions of people who enjoy my show are too stupid to know what's good for them. That they're sheep who need you to educate them about what real entertainment should be. I'm not calling them stupid, Katt protested. I'm saying they deserve better than what they're getting. They deserve comedy that challenges them, that makes them think, that doesn't just pacify them with safe jokes and celebrity games. And who decides what they deserve? Jimmy fired back. You, me? Some committee of authentic comedians who get to determine what counts as worthy entertainment. That's not how art works, Katt. That's not how comedy works. Katt paused, clearly wrestling with Jimmy's point. So, you're saying there's no objective standard for what makes good comedy. I'm saying that good comedy is whatever makes people laugh in a way that doesn't hurt anyone, Jimmy replied. Whether that's observational humor about everyday life or political satire that challenges the system. It's all valid as long as it connects with people genuinely. But what about responsibility? Katt pressed. Don't we have a responsibility as comedians to do more than just make people laugh? Don't we have an obligation to use our platforms for something meaningful? Jimmy walked back toward his desk, but instead of sitting down, he leaned against it casually. Maybe we do, but maybe my way of being responsible is different from yours. Maybe my responsibility is to create a space where people can forget their troubles for 30 minutes. Maybe it's to showcase other comedians and give them exposure they wouldn't get otherwise. And maybe mine is to make sure people don't forget too much, Katt said, a slight smile creeping across his face for the first time since the interview began. Maybe my responsibility is to keep them awake and thinking and questioning. Jimmy nodded slowly. Maybe we both have a point. Maybe the world needs comedians who make people comfortable and comedians who make them uncomfortable. Maybe there's room for both approaches. The tension in the studio was shifting again, the hostile confrontation giving way to something that resembled an actual dialogue between two professionals who disagreed, but were beginning to respect each other's positions. You know what really frustrates me, though? Katt said, sinking back into his chair. It's not just that you play it safe. It's that you're so damn good at what you do that you make it look easy. You make people think that connecting with audiences the way you do doesn't require real skill. Jimmy looked genuinely surprised. Are you giving me a compliment? I'm acknowledging talent when I see it, Katt replied. I may not agree with how you use that talent, but I'd be a fool to pretend it doesn't exist. The way you can make people feel comfortable, the way you can put guests at ease, that's not something every comedian can do. And I'd be a fool to pretend that your approach doesn't have value, too, Jimmy said. The way you can take complex social issues and make them accessible through humor. The way you can make people laugh while making them think. That takes a different kind of skill entirely. The audience was witnessing something remarkable. What had begun as a vicious confrontation was transforming into a mutual recognition of different, but equally valid approaches to comedy. So, where does that leave us? Katt asked. Do we agree to disagree and pretend this never happened? Jimmy thought for a moment. Or maybe we acknowledge that this conversation, as uncomfortable as it's been, is exactly the kind of dialogue that comedy needs more of. Maybe instead of attacking each other for our different approaches, we find ways to learn from each other. You really think there's something you could learn from me? Katt asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I think you've already taught me something tonight, Jimmy replied. You've reminded me that playing it safe all the time can become a trap, that there's value in taking risks and challenging audiences occasionally, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. And you've reminded me that there's nobility in creating joy, even simple joy, Katt admitted. Not every moment has to be a lesson or a confrontation. Sometimes just making people smile is enough. Jimmy extended his hand toward Katt. So, are we good? Katt looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it firmly. We're good, but don't think this means I'm going to start playing it safe in my comedy. And don't think this means I'm going to start setting things on fire in mine, Jimmy laughed. And this time it was his real laugh, not his television laugh. The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite clapping that typically punctuated talk show segments, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation for having witnessed something authentic and unexpected. As the cameras continued to roll and the applause died down, both comedians seemed to understand that they had just participated in something rare in modern entertainment. A real conversation between two artists about their craft, their responsibilities, and their different ways of connecting with audiences. What started as a confrontation had become a masterclass in how two people with fundamentally different perspectives could find common ground without compromising their individual principles. It was a reminder that even in an industry often criticized for being fake and manufactured, Genuine human moments were still possible when people were willing to drop their guards and engage with honesty and respect. If you found this story as compelling as we did, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the moments that define entertainment. And let us know in the comments, do you think comedy should primarily entertain or educate? We want to hear your thoughts on this incredible confrontation between two masters of their craft.